every place we tried was full or not accepting participants because they're on quarantine. So limited resources, especially for housing, is a daily experience in Los Angeles. And how is arresting or sweeping poor people going to create more services or housing? I'm going to wrap up here in a second, but I think liberation begins as we start to hold systems and people accountable and demand not only that they stop hoarding power and resources, but they also cease harming people under the guise of aid. We demand an end to police violence and erasure of poor people, of BIPOC people, of trans folks, those who are undocumented, people who are unhoused, people who use drugs, and of sex workers. We demand rights and dignity, and we demand that Villanova, LASD, and Inglewood police stand down and stop the harmful Super Bowl raids, stings, and sweeps. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sister Soma, telling it. Well, I'm really excited for questions for Soma. And we're going to roll into our next speaker, which is Nana Grafimi, who is with the Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Murders and Justice Warriors for Black Lives, who is an attorney and an activist. Welcome, Nana.
Thank you so very much. My name is Nana Jumphy, and I am a member of the Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Killers, as well as a we're old as dirt and twice as funky, almost 30-year movement attorney out here in these streets, doing work on behalf of the community, including co-founding Justice Warriors for Black Lives. I will talk slower for the sake of interpretation. Thank you so very much for having me here today. I am honored to be here, honored to be invited, hoping that I'll do the job that our dear Margaret Prescott hoped that I would do in talking about what these efforts mean and how we've seen these efforts impact our communities, particularly Black communities. The Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Murders was founded and led by Margaret Prescott coming out of the late 80s. And what was happening were hundreds of women over a 20-year period, Black women and girls, were killed by not just one, a series of serial killers within a 40-mile radius of South Central Los Angeles. There was no effort on the part of city officials, county officials, law enforcement, both city, county, in various areas, including Inglewood, to solve these murders. And repeatedly, Margaret, the families, the loved ones of those victims, and other concerned community members, including myself, were told, I don't know why you're pressing this. After all, these are just prostitutes. That was a common theme over this 2-decade period that Margaret and others had to push back against to get some kind of result. And we know from the research that people have done that police went so far as to write at the top of the police reports when these women, Black women, these girls, Black girls, were found in alleys and trash cans, NHI, which stood for no human involvement. That's how they were describing these sisters. And again, they're describing them that way because they saw them as folks who were sex workers, who were on drugs, and therefore who were literally not human and not worthy of human concern. And in that 20 years, when we think about the lack of investment that was put into bringing some kind of peace to those families, many of whom ended up having their loved ones' deaths connected to Lonnie Franklin, who was dubbed the Grim Sleeper. And I saw just a couple of days ago this image of Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and his team on SoFi Field prepping for the Super Bowl. And I'm seeing the sheriffs in Villanova prepping for the Super Bowl. Do you know how much money we're talking about? Millions of dollars, you best believe it, being invested into so-called safety, mainly targeting this issue of criminalizing sex work. Let's be clear, this is not criminalizing human trafficking. They could give a damn about human trafficking. They're unconcerned. What they're concerned about is how they can criminalize sex work and make that money, make those profits, keep that business of criminalization going on the backs of our people, particularly targeting Black folks, particularly targeting trans folks, to the point that even when my friends from out of town visit and they want to take a walk sometime after sundown, I'm telling them, don't do that, because you're going to be stopped, you're going to be taken in, and you're going to be accused of sex work and all of the horrors that come from that in your interactions with the police. And so I'm hoping that we can continue to get out the word that there is a stark difference between the investment in care and the investment in support for people who are engaged in sex work and sex workers versus the investment, the vast investment in law enforcement and in the caging and criminalizing of people who allegedly they're concerned about. And we further see that lack of concern in the way in which city officials and law enforcement literally interact and treat people that they suspect, let alone know, are engaging in sex work. And so, of course, what I've described with respect to the Black women and girls who were victims of Lonnie Franklin is one area, but I also am working on the cases on behalf of the victims of Ed Buck, who was victimizing Black young gay men who were engaged in sex work, killed 2 of them, almost killed the 3rd within a 2.5-year period. Those men described going to the sheriff's department in West Hollywood and being told to get out of here. We don't want to hear from you. And we know again and again, from your own lived experiences, that interaction with the police is not like it is on Law and Order SVU. There's no Olivia Benson who's just so concerned and trying to figure out how to get you housing and how to get this and how to get that. But instead, it is a very harmful, violent system that hits with full force. We're talking about whether you're young people who are teenagers to folks who are elders. And so I'm pleased to be here speaking with those of you who are doing this work, both the sex work and the liberation work, in order to make sure that people are free. And we stand with you, both as the Black Coalition fighting back serial murders, as Justice Warriors for Black Lives, and as me, myself, and I, Nana Jumphy. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. Oh, so awesome to have you. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate having you here and bringing that really important perspective, because there's the movie, The Grim Sleeper. Everybody should watch that movie. It tells the story of how the police failed, and we need to work hard to hold them all accountable. So thank you for all your great work there. I think that Claire, our technical person, is going to try to launch a poll question for the listeners. So keep a lookout for that. I think that poll question is about, where you're calling in from today, just something to participate in while we listen to our next esteemed speaker, which is Antonia Crane, who is an author and an activist and a sex worker and a PhD candidate at USC. She's the founder of Strippers United. So welcome, Antonia. Tell us what's going on.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. This is incredibly powerful. Thank you, panelists and Maxine, for your stories. It's incredibly important and powerful. Thank you for showing up and teaching us so much. I'm going to tell you my story. Being a hand job whore was a good job in that I never had a mean or abusive client, and I didn't have to turn over half my earnings to a madam, an employer, or a DJ, unlike the strip clubs where I lap danced for decades. My main problem with freelance hand jobbing was the flakiness factor, which is why I scheduled clients back to back whenever I was working. And on Thursday, October 14th, 2010, I was working. My plan was to spend a 45-minute hour with a new client, Steve, at the Rotex Hotel in Koreatown, and afterwards meet my friend Maya at her studio apartment downtown, where we did double rub and tug sessions for her regulars. The chances of a new client showing up was 50-50. So I was surprised when Steve was sitting in the lobby of the Rotex Hotel, fondling a beer bottle and nibbling nuts at a table, waiting for me. I remember seeing a woman reading a magazine at the front desk, watching us while we talked, and I remember not giving a shit. But Steve seemed antsy. He joked distastefully about BDSM. Nothing up my butt, okay? He asked. I was new at hand jobbing solo and was nervous, but needed my rent and cat food. I hurried Steve along. The hotel rooms were across a parking lot. I led Steve towards the exit and walked outside into the balmy mid-October night when Los Angeles is not yet ready to give up summer. Hey, he said, these guys want to talk to you. I looked over to see two cops flash their badges in my face. One cuffed me and shoved me into a white van. They drove me somewhere and locked me into a cell that was like a dog kennel, with one small square window with a view of a wall clock. I was there for several hours while they did more sweeps. Then they cuffed me again and transferred me to 77th Street Jail, where I was booked and dumped into a bigger cell with over a dozen women. Schwarzenegger was still in office in October 14th, 2010, and the governor was trying to keep his anti-immigrant, pro-incarceration Republican grip on California. Remember? All of the other jailed sex workers, all of them were women of color, particularly young Black women. We talked. They said if I'd not been arrested before, I may not be held all weekend. They were right. The following night, I was released. I found out about the diversion program, which is kind of like an expensive traffic school with a workbook and an online class. I had to go to a cramped office on Spring Street and wait in a hallway for someone from American Justice Associates to show up to give me a physical receipt for the $350 change, for the $350 charge for the Think About It workbook. In the workbook, most of the multiple choice questions were all about managing one's anger. Try hitting a pillow when you are angry was one of the suggestions they suggested. Other questions were about domestic violence. Inherent in every question was the underlying belief that I had made a bad choice, that I was being sex trafficked, that I was being beaten, and that I was a very pissed off third grader. After my arrest, I took down my massage ads and my mental health suffered. I refused to see new clients. I had panic attacks. I was afraid I was being followed, of being cuffed and shoved into an unmarked van when walking down the street. And I'm going to share something with you right now, quickly, which is dun, dun, dun. Hello, here we go. Okay, here's the ticket. I move it towards the middle. So I'm showing you this ticket because the officer, there are so many typos on this ticket. I do not have brown hair or brown eyes. It was not 10/15, 2010, it was not Friday. I am like, sir, you are fired. Maybe you should try gardening or take up baking. And I'm going to show you this. This was the American Associates. They still have this program. You can look it up. Think about it. You're in control. And here's who they are. And they charged $350 back in 2010. It's probably more now. Stop share. Thank you for looking at that. Okay. The Think About It diversion program still exists as an alternative to incarceration. It drops the M for misdemeanor from your record, but it does not address institutional racism, whorephobia, and the societal stigma of sex work used to justify the criminalization of a robust consensual workforce. On March 17th, 2011, I completed the diversion program. But I think about the thousands of other incarcerated sex workers who don't have that luxury. And I think about my attorney's fees, the program fees, and lost income. Thousands and thousands of dollars that could be diverted to sex workers to provide healthcare, housing, and resources they actually need. I think about that. I hope you will too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antonia. Yeah, being arrested made an activist out of me. I thought about it when I was in jail. I knew exactly what I was going to do when I got out of jail. Yeah, the best motivator. Don't get a resentment, give one. Okay, enough of me. So next we're going to have our next speaker, which is Alex McCullough. Is an organizer for the U.S. Prostitutes Collective. It's our first time hearing her speak too, and we're so excited to hear from you, Alex. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Let me know if my internet becomes unstable and you can't hear me. My name is Alex McCullough, and I'm with the U.S. Prostitutes Collective. Us Pros is a multiracial network of women who work or who have worked in the sex industry, organizing for decriminalization of sex work and for resources so that no one is driven into prostitution because of poverty. Growing up, I struggled with poverty, and when I was a teenager, I became involved in the underground street economy. Many of my peers were criminalized and incarcerated for trying to make money any way that they could. Sex work was one of the few options that people with criminal records can do to survive. Us Pros is alarmed at the ramped up law enforcement operations that are taking place for the LA Super Bowl. The law enforcement task force looking into these, I am so sorry. We're really alarmed and ramped up that these law enforcement operations are being ramped up for these Super Bowls. As Nana had mentioned, like, where are these agencies when these women, some of whom were sex workers, were victims of serial murders in South LA? Where were they for the scores of women from the same community who are still missing and their loved ones don't know if they're still alive or if they're dead? The law enforcement task force looking into these murders and missing women have been disbanded. Meanwhile, federal, state, and local law enforcement are brought in under the pretext that the Super Bowl is a magnet for human trafficking. We have seen this trend before, where Super Bowls and other large sporting events are falsely connected with a rise in sex trafficking and become an excuse for police crackdowns, while sex workers who are victims of violence are ignored for their murders. Or their murders referred to as NHI, no human involved, as Nana also mentioned before. Like, how dare they? That's not right. Racist, sexist, and classist anti-trafficking enforcement leads to street sweeps, stings, and raids, including of sex workers, whether they're trafficked or not, houseless people, and others in low-income communities and communities of color. For example, when the Super Bowl came to San Francisco, where I'm based, sweeps of the street community took place throughout the whole city. Police raids and sting operations target the most vulnerable sex workers, women who are working the streets. Black, trans, and migrant women are disproportionately targeted. Anti-trafficking operations also include arrests of women working in massage parlors, hotels, online, as well as men accused of buying sex. Data from a report on policing and prosecution in Los Angeles shows a pattern of racist and sexist enforcement of prostitution laws in LA. 89.7% of those arrested for soliciting prostitution are women, while the report quotes that Black people are disproportionately impacted and drastically overrepresented in prostitution-related charges. Black people make up over 50% of these arrests. And this is also a trend we see for everything else. Often Black people also make up more than 50% of the population in the jails, which is ridiculous. There are more statistics that you can look at some of the reports that we've added on the Stop the Raids website as well. So what's clear from these statistics is that women of all experiences that are living in poverty, especially women of color, will be the most impacted by the Super Bowl anti-trafficking operations. A recent report on over-policing and sex trafficking is highly critical of and spells out the harm of anti-trafficking operations. It reveals inhumane, traumatizing treatment of women during operations by law enforcement, which include verbal, physical, and sexual abuse. It shows that these operations are, in practice, anti-sex work operations. They fail to identify any victims of trafficking, and if they do, actual victims don't get the help or resources they need. These truths are not just being reported through research in the United States. Our sister group Empower in Thailand also released a report called Hit and Run, which shows the damaging impact that anti-trafficking policy and practice has on sex workers' human rights in Thailand. Internationally, these laws have been used to stop women crossing borders. Empower points out that restrictions against safe, independent migration should be the foundation of any discussion around trafficking. In the US, migrant sex workers face arrest and deportation following anti-trafficking raids. One of the US report's conclusions calls for poverty relief. Us Pros has been campaigning for measures to tackle women's poverty, which is increasing. 73% of people living in poverty in the United States are women and children. The fastest growing population among the homeless are women, as well as women being the fastest growing population of those going to prison. We demand to know what the budget is. How much have local, state, and federal agencies spent on these operations? We and the general public have a right to know. This is money that could have been used to help tackle poverty and not further criminalize us. Poverty is driving more of us into sex work to survive. Many are single mothers, and this is why we are a part of a campaign for a care income for the work of caring people and the planet. We are calling out the lies behind this trumped up scam that these anti-trafficking operations are needed to keep people safe. What we need are rights and resources. We have been campaigning for decades and have won many victories along the way. Recently, we've won an immunity from arrest bill for sex workers reporting violence in California, also known as Senate Bill 233. We've also won victim compensation for sex workers and formerly incarcerated people and more. We have a Know Your Rights booklet on protection, justice, and compensation, which covers these protections and other campaigns that we are involved in to win decriminalization. The movement for decriminalization is growing nationally and globally. Recently, there was also an anti-loitering bill that was repealed in New York, and many states have introduced bills challenging criminalization. It is more important than ever that we continue to come together and fight anti-prostitution laws, and for a world where ending poverty is a priority and meanwhile, where poverty is no longer criminalized. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. So much of what Alex talked about, some of it is like the report is on our website, stoptheraids.org. You can go there and you can see all the groups and links to all the people. Also, you can see links to all the reports, and we're going to hear more about some of the reports from some of the other speakers that are coming up. Our next speaker is Jerry Mosley, who's an author of Sex Workers and Their Clients in Their Own Words, and is a retired lawyer from the Office of California Attorney General. Jerry, how are you tonight? Okay, Jerry, you want to unmute yourself if you can.
There, how's that? Am I coming through now? Okay, okay. Well, thanks, Maxine. I want to follow up on the one comment from Alex about anti-trafficking, so-called anti-trafficking stings. And I want to talk for a minute about the messaging that goes from law enforcement through the press to the general public. Folks who don't know anything about this topic except what they read in the headlines. And we should all be aware of that messaging. Those folks out there reading the paper are going to hear two claims, and those claims have already been started. One claim is, in connection with the Super Bowl, the police are out on a sting. It is an operation. It is a campaign. In a very excited moment, they may say it is a war against trafficking. And we're going to go out this Super Bowl season and we're going to fight the traffickers. And this is our whole point, is to address trafficking. A few days later, the general public will read another headline and it will say, so many people were arrested during this campaign, in connection with this campaign, following this campaign, people were arrested. And they'll probably give you a number, 100 people, maybe 1,000 people, I don't know. They were all arrested, period, end of headline. Now, there is a terrible problem with that kind of message, because both of those claims may actually be true. It may be the case that the police went out on some huge campaign. We don't know how huge it is, but it might be true. They may swarm the streets, we don't know. And it also may be true that while they were swarming the streets, they arrested a whole lot of people. Maybe they did arrest 100 people. But when you put those headlines together and you feed those headlines to the general public is deceived, because the implication, the obvious implication, is that those people who were arrested were traffickers, or they were involved in trafficking somehow. That's the obvious implication. Even if the press doesn't actually say it, that's what they're communicating. The moral of the story is you don't have to lie in order to be deceptive. That is the story that the public is going to get, and that is the impression that they're going to have when they put the newspaper down, and that's the last they think about it, and they go off to their full-time jobs. They're thankful that the cops have now protected them from traffickers. What the truth will actually be, if the past is any indication at all, is that Those 100 people who were arrested, almost all of them, maybe all of them, will have nothing whatsoever to do with trafficking. Trafficking is sex work that's coerced, or that's brought about through fraud, or it's underage. Now, most, if not all of these people arrested in those headlines are going to be consenting sex workers and their clients. That's it. The only thing that will happen is that those people will be oppressed, and anybody whose name gets leaked to the press in connection with that campaign, well, you know what's going to happen there. Even though they had nothing whatsoever to do with trafficking, their name is now going to be forever linked with a trafficking investigation. Why does that happen? It doesn't happen because there was any evidence ever of trafficking in this person's life. It's because of the messaging. It's because the way the general public is being manipulated. And even for those people, there may be some traffickers who get arrested. But if you're patient and you follow up, you'll notice something funny. Probably none of these people who are arrested for trafficking are ever charged with trafficking. Gee whiz, why is that? When the district attorney looks at the evidence, they say, no, there's no trafficking here. And the problem, of course, is it takes some digging and some patience to uncover this. What the media needs to do, what needs to happen, is something very simple. Law enforcement needs to be asked the real questions. Who did you arrest? Why did you arrest them? You mean there are some of them that were arrested for trafficking? What reason did you have to believe they were trafficked? Simple questions like that. I personally have never heard reporters ask law enforcement those questions. I have never heard it. I don't know why. They're simple English questions. Just ask them. The second thing that has to happen is, of course, you have to be patient, and you have to wait and look and see what happens as the judicial process proceeds. And then write your next headline. Don't hide it in the back pages. The headline, it says, remember that big sting we talked about before? Nobody was charged ultimately with trafficking. Most of you probably have heard the incident in Florida. You heard about it because the owner of the New England Patriots got arrested. But that sting is a perfect example here. It was a sting of massage parlors where, God forbid, they suspected that sex was going on in there. If I may add a footnote, the safest kind of sex that two human beings can possibly engage in, but that's another story. They wanted to save us. They wanted to save us from hand jobs. So they were out there stinging away. Unfortunately, they arrested a guy with a lot of money, and he defeated them rather handedly. But there were other people who were arrested, poor immigrant Asian women, largely. They didn't have all of those resources. But despite the fact that all these people were arrested, hello, you guessed it, not a single one was ultimately charged with trafficking. None. One Chinese masseuse. They brought her in. They arrested her. They need to have trafficking to show the public their heroic war. They told this woman, this is an immigrant Chinese woman. You can imagine how unsophisticated and vulnerable she is. They said, we will give you an apartment We will make sure that your children in China can come to this country to be with you if you just say you were trafficked. Will you just say that you were trafficked? That woman, I respect her more than anybody else I have read about in the press. She had more decency and honesty than the cops did. She said, no, I wasn't trafficked. They kept going. They kept pressuring her. You can imagine these detectives pressuring this poor Chinese lady who just wants to get away from them. They kept pressuring her to say that she was trafficked. Finally, they broke her down. And she said, okay, I won't say that I was not trafficked, but I'm not going to say I was trafficked. I'll just keep my mouth shut. And they let her go. That's what the cops did. I'm not saying that all cops do that, but that is disgraceful. And that is what happens when law enforcement are desperate to show trafficking as what they're really doing when they're going out arresting people like Maxine and Antonia. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, when we had International Horse Day this year, we put up our banners, our freeway blogging banners to say that, we support, Asian massage parlor workers. I feel that that was a really important public message to send out, especially after, the violence that happened in Atlanta. That we think is a direct result of this media campaign that Jerry spoke of. And, we just want to put a stop to that type of propaganda and verbal violence. We're gonna go and hear another speaker. We're gonna hear Brad Sears, who's Associate Dean of the Public Interest Law at UCLA School of Law, and is founding executive director of the Williams Institute. So the Williams Institute, for folks that might have never heard of it, is a really great place that does a lot of great research for the LGBT community. That research has been used to drive a bunch of policy changes, and we're going to hear about some of Brad's good work. Welcome, Brad.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me here. And it's an honor to be part of this discussion with everyone. I think I'm just going to amplify basically what everyone else has said. And I think if there's any kind of take-home point is that this campaign against trafficking, the criminalization of sex work, is not about stopping, preventing any sort of harm. It's not about safety. It's not about security for anyone. It's, as previous speakers have said, it's about control, I think as someone has said, or feeding the prisons and our kind of prison industrial complex, as Nana said. Like, this is about controlling populations and feeding a system. It is not about individuals and their behaviors. And so I think my main area of research related to sex work deals with the criminalization of sex work for people living with HIV. But Jerry just mentioned there's, 100 people will be arrested. They're just not going to be arrested for trafficking. I think what our research shows is who those 100 people are likely to be. And so I think when you have law enforcement out there with crimes that are easy to prove, it allows their kind of bias to show up in all sorts of ways. So I'm just going to briefly talk about sexual orientation, gender identity, then HIV status, and then race. And those three things overlap a lot. So I'll be talking about all three at once to some extent. I think Alex mentioned that, 80% of the people in the state arrested for sex work are women. That other 20% are men or trans women who have been misgendered by the systems that collect this data, which I think is a horrible problem in the system. So I would account some of that as trans women, but a lot of gay or bisexual men or men who have sex with men as well. We know trans women in particular are targeted by the police. I'm sure many of you have heard the phrase walking by trans. It's like driving while black. But if you're walking outside and law enforcement sees you and identifies you as transgender, chances are you're going to be stopped and questioned or picked up for sex work. I'm going to put a study that we did with Bienestar and the Trans Latino Coalition about the experiences of trans Latinos with law enforcement that shows that of those who had been stopped by the police, 60% reported that they were doing nothing when stopped besides going to the grocery store, walking the dog, visiting a friend, but they were merely the fact they were on the street and trans, they were suspected of being sex workers. We then asked, and this was about 220 women, we asked them about their experiences with law enforcement. Over 2/3 had said they'd been verbally harassed by law enforcement, and this is here in Southern California. About 1 in 5 said they'd been physically assaulted by law enforcement, and 1 in 4 sexually assaulted. So, those are shockingly high numbers. But law enforcement is going out and arresting people for solicitation. If you go nationally for loitering with the intent to solicit, standing around looking suspicious is how I would translate that. This who looks suspicious to them, it is LGBTQ people and women of color. The fastest growing part of the incarcerated population right now are girls and young women and women. Sexual minority girls and women make up 30 to 40% of those are incarcerated. And so we also know that there's much higher rates of incarceration for all parts of the LGBT community. The next layer I want to add on is HIV status. And luckily, thanks to the work of a lot of people, including people on this Zoom, we have gotten rid of the law that made it a felony for engaging in sex work if you are HIV positive. If you're not familiar with this law, you might think, well, there might be sense in that. You want to prevent HIV. Well, if there was any sense to that law, it probably would have penalized cases in which somebody actually was transmitted HIV by a sex worker. Was not required by that law, and it's not required by any law, similar law in 30 other states. You might say, well, that law probably criminalized the intent to transmit HIV. That's what somebody was intending to do by engaging in sex. And no, that's not the case in this state and almost any state in the country. And so you might say, well, surely that law would have required somebody to show that the sex worker engaged in behavior that could transmit HIV. No, it was not. It was not at all a requirement of that law. And so, like as Antonia was talking about, like whether you were doing a hand job, whether you're going to have oral sex, no matter what you were going, whether it was sex play, no matter what it was, if it was solicitation as defined by the law, so sex for money, that was it. There was no other requirement that the behavior you engage in actually transmit the virus. We've been looking at enforcement of these laws, throughout the United States. And in 99% of them, there's no transmission, no intent to transmit, and there's no conduct that would even make it possible to transmit. And when you think about that, when you think about how sex workers are arrested, it makes perfect sense because the majority, I think, fit in, and I thank you for sharing your story, Antonia, but I think fit that story of being entrapped, of like being part of a sting. And so, of course, no sex has actually happened before those arrests. And so there's nothing that could happen that would transmit HIV. And when we look at the criminalization of HIV, it's mainly the criminalization of sex workers. So we did a study in 2015 about all of the HIV criminal arrests in the state. There were about 800. 753 of those were against sex workers. What did that mean for those people arrested? It meant that what would have been charged as a misdemeanor was kicked up to a felony, punishable up to 3 years in prison. And the average sentence, when we looked at the actual sentencing data, was about 2 years. And so the consequences definitely were ramped up. When we look at this in other states, folks who get that special crime for sex workers who are HIV positive, they also go on the sex offender registries where they stay on for life and have other lifelong consequences, including not being able to vote, the consequences of having a felony on your record. And then I'll just end by mentioning the kind of overlap of these arrests with race. And I think if I'm going to try, let's see if I can do this. I'm going to try to share screen if that's okay. So hopefully you're looking at a slide. This is looking at a number of states where we've looked at this. If you see the first little blue bar, and we'll start here in California, but you can see this is true in every state. This is the percentage of the state that are Black women. If you look at the yellow bar, we'll see that HIV has been allowed to spread in Black communities, unlike in white communities in particular. And so there's a higher percentage of Black women in every single state who have HIV. Well, if you take a disease that you've allowed to spread among a certain racial group because you haven't provided adequate resources or care, and then you make a crime out of having that disease, HIV, you end up with that orange bar. And so that's the percentage of Black women in each state among those arrested for HIV-related sex work crimes. And so you see the kind of compounded impact of a disease, HIV, that's been allowed to run its course in Black communities and a criminal justice system that targets Black people. And you see that just showing up, I think, kind of dramatically. You can find this.
Hey, Brad, can you just move your slide over one? Oh, darn.
Okay. Okay. Can you see it now, or?
Saw the end of your slideshow.
Oh, let's see.
Better.
Okay. Let me move that. Yeah. So anyway, and I can send this around afterwards. I mean, I think the driving point is it's not random who the police are going after in the name of, kind of protecting people. It is the same people, that have been left, that have been not provided access to health care, that is facing kind of economic difficult situations, and that the criminal system goes after. And so I guess I would just echo everyone else, is that my research is focusing on HIV criminalization is none of this is about individual behavior. None of this is about safety. It's about systems, and that's where our attention should focus.
Thank you so much, Brad. Appreciate you being here. And the tracking and tracing report that Brad and Alex referred to is on the Stop the Raids website. So you can go and see it all for yourself. I saw 13 people who were cited for escorting without a license. So yeah, there's not big public safety danger there, and a waste of public safety resources on that one, I'm sure. And our next speaker has a really exciting report that I read the other night. Chella, who is with Stop the LAPD Spying Coalition, which released this fabulous report. It's called Automating Banishment, about the surveillance and practices of the Los Angeles Police Department. And I'm going to have some questions. We're going to be able to take the questions. There's some Q&A. You can use a Q&A, put your questions in the Q&A chat. And Chella, take it away. Can't wait to hear from you.
Hey all, sorry about the alarm. I live in Skid Row. So I'm going to introduce myself and then I'll get into the actual study. My name's Chella. I go by she and they interchangeably. Please, I am on Tongvaland in Skid Row. I am with Stop LAPD Spying and SWAP, Sex Workers Outreach Project as well. I've been with both of them for a minute. And I live in Skid Row, as I just named. So that being said, I would love to talk to y'all about, our CNAP study. So yeah, so I just want to open it up with saying that this is, that we like to say that this is not a moment in time, but a continuation of history, right? This is nothing new. The only difference is the tactics, right? And with that being said, citywide CNAP, Citywide Nuisance Abatement Program, created by LAPD, was to target buildings and specific folks that wanted to get out. They teamed up with agencies at the DA's office, the housing corporations wanted to get out, and they incentivized owners to pretty much kick them out. And how they did that was they changed rules, and they were also data sharing between each other. Not only that, but they were also surveilling folks and criminalizing and evicting folks. Um, uh, Data sharing has been sorry, with a yearly budget of 3.2 million. When I read that, I was well, I live in Skid Row. We could use that for housing, with a yearly budget of 3.2 million. They get a lot of different things to actually do these things. There's Stingray technology. After the uprisings in 2011 in MacArthur Park in Hollywood, they wanted to criminalize people, so they started having cameras that took pictures of their license plate, and it would send it to a bigger thing, and they would share it with each other. Not just LAPD, but actually the Fusion Center. There's I don't know if y'all know about SARS, which is suspicious activity reporting. It's a bunch of things that's also in the report, I think. Um, let's see. Um, yeah, I think I'm done. I just also want to talk about the fact that they literally also get informants. And the Stingray technology. That is something I actually know a lot of. So if you've ever in LA specifically, if you've gone to City Hall, which is right across the street from the metro police station, literally, my phone sometimes messes up, and I'll be like, "What's going on?" Or it slows down, or like I'm not able to like go live like I would if I was right here. Right? They have a technology that either that disrupts the power, and also that takes information, right? So surveillance is all over the place, and they also incentivize people to be informants, and like they get folks, they arrest them for something that's like a nuisance, like just drinking with the having an open container outside, right? And they're like, hey, if you don't want to go to jail, go mess with those people down the street, go mess with those, go and tell us what they're saying, go tell us what. And then there's also program, which is see something, say something, which is a snitch program, which they also incentivize my apartment complex. Like literally, they incentivize a lot of the leaders here to like snitch on us. Yeah. The scene, I can actually post where you can read the CNAP study in the chat for folks who want to know. And yeah, I'm actually done. I think I did a good job.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. I hope you stick around because there's going to be some questions for you, because I read that study and I read the banishment, the automation banishment, and yeah. And we're going to talk to our last two speakers tonight. We have Pearl Callahan, who was a 15-year-old and mother of a young son when she entered the sex trade. Today, she is an advocate for those who are victims of forced labor in the sex trade. Haven't got to talk to you in a while, Pearl. Welcome. Okay, Pearl, you're going to have to unmute yourself. You're muted. There you are.
Hear me now?
Yes, thank you, Pearl.
Hi. Well, guys, this is the first time for me. I haven't been involved in any of your discussions before. And I just want to say that I am happy to be here. I was working for 40 years as a sex worker. I started off being trafficked is a very foreign word for me. is something that I don't really, it's not real for me. So I was trafficked when I was very, very young, with a baby, didn't have any money, came from a very poor neighborhood. And I was raised by my dad, who had a bunch of kids that did it all himself. I got pregnant and I needed to be responsible. So I got out there, and a lot of things happened to me. But the most important thing that I want to talk about is loitering with intent, because I was out there on those streets. And I just have to say, nothing has changed in all these years. That's what's so sad to me. Nothing has changed. Even the tactics, these so-called new tactics, they're not new. They're just rebranded, that's all. But more than that, those streets that I walked on in my neighborhood, I had to grocery shop. I lived in that neighborhood. And if I had anything on that was form-fitting, that was tight, that was anything, they would stop me. They wanted to know where I was going, who I was. And this was just my neighborhood. So what I'm saying to you is, in my own neighborhood, I wasn't able to walk freely and just be. So I got involved with SWAP and with Maxine, with that legislature that we passed, that we helped to pass. That was like the proudest day of my life, with SB 233, that we could actually report a crime when I was out there working. I didn't have to worry about being arrested. And so that for me was the proudest, right? That we got to report crimes like everybody else did. So now we need to work on this loitering with intent. We need to ban it, because it is, you can't be anywhere. You don't even have to do anything, be doing anything, but just walking down the street, and you're approached and you are humiliated. You are 10 times worse if you're Black. Okay. So it's like, it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help me to be arrested. It's just the way it affects you is you're scared to go anywhere. You're scared to go in your neighborhood, to just walk around, to go to the store, because if one of those cops that jammed you up before sees you, you may not come back home. So this law that they have, this new one, SB 357, right? Senator Scott Wiener is behind that. And we need to get that passed so that we are free. I am free to walk around like everybody else. And I don't have to be fearful of being arrested just for wearing something really cute and sexy. You know what I mean? So I just want everybody to contact Scott Wiener, his office, so we can work, and the governor, because it's on the desk now, okay? It's on the desk and we just need him to sign it, okay? That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Pearl. Yes, Senate Bill 357 has passed the state legislatures. It repeals the loitering with intent to commit prostitution law, which is the, walking while the police don't want you to bill, and use that bill or that bad law to just, pick you up. And so we want to repeal that law. It's on the governor's desk. So I put a link in the chat to that bill. You can see it. All the listeners, please contact your Governor Newsom ASAP and urge him to sign that bill and support the repeal of that bad law. So our last speaker is going to be Kristen D'Angelo, who is a community organizer. a political activist, educator, and an expert witness. She is the co-founder, the executive director of SWAP Sacramento. Welcome, Kristen.
Thank you so much for having me, Maxine. Okay, I am unmuted. And I would like to talk today about, we've heard a lot about how they deal with prostitution and sex work today in this age. We're criminalized, obviously, and even those industries that are technically legal, because the majority of sex work is technically legal. They're still not treated fairly. They're still not given the same voice as all the other workers out there. And so we've heard a lot about what isn't working. And what I want to do is I want to talk about what is and what you can do to help us. So Claire, I have some slides, and I was going to have you start on the 4th slide. Can you put up the 3rd slide? Because there are 4 ways that we deal with sex work in the United States or around the world. And the 4 ways, the 4 models that they use are criminalization, our model here, throw us in jail, take away our rights, do all that kind of stuff. Then there is what we call asymmetrical criminalization, which is where nowadays there are some really cute phrases such as in demand or the Nordic model. But what it really means is they're going to arrest the male side of the equation, the customer side of the equation, not always a male, but the majority of time. And this is a model that the United States has been moving toward. We see a lot more what we call client stings. It's not a new model. It's been around since I was a kid. I too have been in the sex trade over 40 years. And I myself am a survivor of trafficking. I lost almost a decade of my life. And so when people tell me like, oh, you're a consensual sex worker, we can understand why you wouldn't want, to be criminalized. I'm like, no, I was criminalized as a somebody who was engaging in forced labor. I was criminalized at that point in my life, and it did not work for me. So they, even when I was a kid and now, they tend to look of ways to keep the criminalization going. And one of the ways is to say that they want to criminalize the clients. In theory, what that means is it decreases demand. So the supply will decrease, sort of like saying that if we get rid of the clients, that the workers will all disappear. We no longer need food. They also believe that if they get rid of sex work, if they get us off the streets, off the internet, off the poles, out of the massage parlors, if they make us disappear from that kind of meaningful employment, we will find other meaningful employment in their world, as if we fit in their world, or we want to be in that world. They also believe that that will end trafficking, that as long as we decrease the demand, we get rid of the client side of the equation, the trafficking will just disappear. Forced labor will disappear if we arrest the clients. And in this model, they believe we're all victims. The problem is all of those don't really work in real life application. Number one is when you decrease demand, it creates a buyer's market, which means they get to negotiate the terms, and people who are working no longer get to do that. The clients are scared. So what that means is the workers take more risk. We negotiate down our security screening in order to continue seeing clients, to continue to survive. We end up charging lower rates. The reason we charge lower rates is because clients who have privilege will go other places. If they go other places to find us, we are left with the people who can't do that in the area. So what happens is you have more people out there working and less clients. So that means that we begin competing and we begin to negotiate the prices down. Where clients stop allowing to be screened. They won't pay deposits because they don't want anything tracked to them because they are no longer safe. One of the biggest things that I'm against with the Nordic model, or asymmetrical criminalization, which is, I believe, what we should call it, is that okay, wait, what was I going to say? Is that when this happens, I can't even think of where I am. Oh, Our support services and nonprofits can be charged with a crime for helping the workers when this happens. Okay, and what I mean by that is we try to help the workers like, okay, we'll go over here where it's safer, do this or do that. Well, that in itself becomes a crime. So we can no longer instruct people on how to stay safe. So asymmetrical criminalization does not work overall. They think it does, it doesn't. It isn't new, it's been going on for a long time. Can we go to the next slide? I'm trying to rush through this. I know I only have so long, so I'm going fast. I'm sorry, I know I should slow down. Another way we talk about is legalization. Legalization, I have worked in a legal environment. I've worked in a criminalized environment. I've never worked in any other type of environment, only legalized and decriminalized. Legalized worked for me. It doesn't work for the majority of the models. When we talk about legalization in the United States, we talk about brothels because that's how we've seen it in Nevada, which means that most of the workers have to give away a lot of their money to the structure that they're under. In order to work in a legalized environment, you have to get a work card from the police department, which means the police are the gatekeepers of who works and who doesn't. It also allows for discrimination of minorities. In all the years I worked up in the brothels, one of the things that we saw all the time was that they had what you call a product mix. They want to make sure that the brothel brings in the most money possible, which means they pick the people they believe will bring in the most money. It was actually a very widely talked about practice, even up to recently, because I've been up there talking to them, in that each brothel will only have one Black woman working, one Hispanic woman working, one woman who may have extra weight on her working. They take and try to keep the majority of the workers blonde, Asian, redhead, thin, those stereotypes that our media has portrayed and what beauty is. They try to make that what the mixture is in that brothel. Well, what does that mean? That means the majority of people of color will never work in a brothel. That means the majority of people who could work are not allowed to work. What does that mean? That means the majority are still criminalized because they're going to work outside of the structure. So if the majority is still criminalized, we really haven't achieved anything. I was being trafficked when I was in a brothel. Legalization did nothing to help me. I never would have said anything. It had nothing to do whether I was being exploited or not. There are other reasons that this isn't good. There's segregation that happens in the brothels. Most of the time they're zoned for where they can be, and that usually isn't where dense populations are. So the majority of brothels are away from where people live. What that means is mothers have to leave their children in order to work in them. Many of them are lockdown facilities. So when you go in, you are not allowed to leave until your tour is up. So many times back then we were locked down 3 weeks. I hear the lockdown facilities today, they still exist, are 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, you're locked in there. So that means you're 2 weeks without your kids. You're 2 weeks without your family. You're 2 weeks without any support, anything that you need. And many times those brothels aren't in a town or city or state that you live in. So you have to leave home in order to do that. And one of the biggest things when we talk about legalization is that it is legalized statewide. It is not legalized federally. So back when I was there, and still today, the feds would come in with dogs, they would raid us, they would throw us up against the walls, they would tear through our stuff in order to harass us. So legalization for me is not a good model. Number one is most of us don't want to go to the police who we've suffered abuse and rape and many things from in order to ask permission to work. That shouldn't happen. Can you go on to the next slide, Claire? So we talk about decriminalization, and a lot of people think that means that, you know, you just run around and do whatever you want. Okay. What that means is that we want our labor to be like everybody else's labor. Teachers aren't criminalized. Lawyers aren't criminalized. Doctors aren't criminalized. None of the labor industries that we hear about so often are criminalized. That's all we want. We want to be able to work, and we want everybody to be able to work. We want our most marginalized people to be able to work. We want our people of color to be able to work, our trans workers to be able to work. People, no matter what like socioeconomic status they come from, no matter what neighborhood they come from, no matter where they live, we want them to work with sometimes the only tool that they have available, which is very often their body, and to be able to do it in the safest possible manner so that they can earn a living, they can become a contributing member of society, and they can do that safely with the support of society and culture around us. Okay, so how does that happen? That happens by repealing the prostitution laws, repealing the loitering with intent laws. That happens by the community standing up and saying that this has gone too far, that we should be able to have autonomy over our own bodies. Can you go to the next slide, Claire? So what I'd like you to do, and we've heard so many amazing people on here, is to really get involved, to really take action, not just to, write one letter or say, oh yeah, I believe in that. Like, take action. And there are many ways you can. If you go to the stoptheraids.org website, you will see that all of us have our websites on there, and you can donate to us. Why do you need to donate to us? Because we are doing this work, many of us, for free. We work long hours, we work hard, we are targeted, and yet we have no funding or little funding. And we're working against, power. We are standing up against power who has large amounts of funds. And for us to do this, we have to be able to support ourselves and support the actions that we need to take in order to decriminalize sex work. Get involved. How do you get involved? Contact the organizations, donate your time, donate your expertise, and have a voice. We talked about sending out letters to people. The other thing you could do is, you'll see here on this slide that I've listed the Twitter handles of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, the Los Angeles County, and George Gascon's, the District Attorney's Office, okay? We want them to hear from you with the tag Stand with Sex Workers and Super Bowl LVI 2022. I have it all on there. Take a picture of it with your phone. When we get off this, tweet them. Tell them you're tired of this shit too. Tell them you're tired of the funds going to police intervention, criminal intervention, instead of services for the most marginalized people that have them. Okay, thank you. That's it. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Yeah, I mean, Soma, what could you do with some real services when we see the repeal of the criminalization of prostitution laws? I mean, to redivert that $3.2 million that Chella was talking about that's used for surveillance, how would that make a big difference, especially right now at the Super Bowl, where the most marginalized people in Los Angeles are just being terrorized by the sheriff's department?
I think one of the things I would say is housing, over and over again, housing. It's illegal to be unhoused in Los Angeles, because of 4118. People are being swept, and there's this law that says you can't be out on the street. So I think a large portion of that, people need support around housing, and that speaks to so many safety issues for folks too. We know about how many sex workers have been lost to the street after they were managing their own business before because of Sesta Fosta. And, as you talked about at the beginning, there's another act that's coming up right now, Earn It Act, that is going to really damage people in the same way. So yeah, housing and mental health and, like all the things that surround wellness, whether that's meditation or access to healthcare or, childcare, there's just so many things that we could support. And then, harm reduction, I would say as well, there's that intersection that's hard to discuss in some ways for people who use drugs and sex work, because it's like criminalization on top of criminalization. And there's like the hierarchy stigma around people who use drugs. This sort of like idea that to be able to work, we have to be addicted, so it's hard to talk about this really deeply. But yeah, I would leave it there and pass it to whoever else.
I know that some of our other panelists definitely have some follow-up information that they want to contribute, and you can just certainly raise your hand. We know that the Super Bowl is on Sunday. That there are some raids that are going on against our community, against houseless people, people of color in LA. There's a lot of groups in LA that we can lend our support and our voice to in social media, in tagging the sheriff's department, certainly, and the district attorney. The district attorney, they had their own webinar today on sex trafficking, surprise, and they gave out a bunch of false and misleading information. I swear to you, they spent most of the time talking about posters, how posters and finding places to put their posters was their answer to stopping forced labor in the sex industry and in other industries. And if they took that money that they were spending on posters and really invested it into some stable, safe housing, what a real big difference that would make. So I think joining our struggles with some of our local neighborhood struggles is always a good time, good thing to do for our time. And certainly that was one of our goals here with our Stop the Raids committee.
Can I say something?
Please do.
Yeah, hi, Alex again. So I do see some questions in the chat. I also see that Soma answered part of it too. There is a protest happening on Friday in Los Angeles. So if you are local in that area, please look at the information that was shared in the chat so that you can get plugged into the action that's going to be happening on Friday. And there's another question that says, when I tell my friends about these raids during the Super Bowl, they think I'm trying to tell them to stop the Super Bowl. How do I tell them this isn't what it's about verbally without sharing links? So if other people also have an answer to that, I personally would recommend that you just make a connection to the fact that it's not the NFL that's pushing these narratives, but it's the police that are using events like this to make an excuse to bring more police out, right? And it's also, there is a law that was passed some time during Trump's administration where big sporting events, including the Olympics and just any big sporting event, was considered something that would be federalized as far as law enforcement. So like as of now, the police department isn't just calling on local law enforcement, they're calling on ICE, they're calling on Homeland Security, they're calling on anybody who can put handcuffs on people and who they can get funding to put in a budget. And yes, Joanna in the chat said the national security, where did it go? National Special Security Event. So if people look that up, you'll see that events like this, including the Olympics, are highly militarized. And then I also, yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to share. There are hella ways to get involved with people by checking out that website. Also, if you're someone who's going to be out there on the street, the booklet that Us Pros released, our Know Your Rights booklet for sex workers and formerly incarcerated people and others, is a really good resource to just know what your laws or your rights are when you're on the street, so that if a police officer arrests you for doing sex work, they can't use condoms as evidence against you. If you are trying to report violence to the police, they can't arrest you for misdemeanor amounts of drugs. Like, there's so many rights that we need to know that we have on the streets, so that we can protect ourselves when they try to manipulate us with their words of the law. But yeah, stay safe, everybody, and please share this information with people and find out how you can get involved in the decrim movement, because there's so many harmful narratives going against us, and we really need the folks who are the most impacted by this to be empowered. And I know that's hard because we're all fighting poverty. So this is where rich people come in and sprinkle your money on our organizing and help mutual aid efforts and support all of the organizing efforts that go into this. We all do this for free. And if we do get funding, it's like nothing goes to us. It all goes to the resources and research that we have to put into this work. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Alex. Yeah, there's a bunch of ways to be involved in the sex worker rights movement without having to put your face publicly to be in association with activism. You can contact any of our groups that are listed on the stoptheraids.org website. And we can talk about that. Our group is in the middle of doing a big public records request too about surveillance techniques. And, you don't have to, use your real name. You don't have to put your face on the media. I think one of the questions was about, how do we continue to work in the business and do our activism? And I know that Kristen's got some experience with that. Soma probably does. Alex probably does. Antonia. There's just a bunch of ways that, I don't use my work persona when I'm doing my activism stuff. I keep my work totally separate. And so, there's a bunch of ways to negotiate those things. We have a lot of experience with that. Maybe we can have a webinar on that someday. But does anybody else want to chime into any of those questions?
I wanted to talk a little bit about the money flow. So people often wonder, well, why do they do this then? If it isn't helping, like if it isn't saving the kids, like they put it out to be, why do they do this? Like, why do they do this? It's about money. It's about the money flow. During the times like the Super Bowl and other times, police departments receive large grants, huge amounts of grants to stop human trafficking. And if they don't come up with some numbers, then they're going to lose that money. And so it's very, very important for them that they keep the criminalization going, and they will do it any way they can. The problem with that is it no longer is about doing what's right or really helping people. It's about them staying employed. And if they were to stop criminalizing us, their money flow in that area would probably dwindle, and they don't want that to happen. The problem is the criminalization of us includes the criminalization of people who are being exploited. I was arrested when I was being exploited. Most people I know were arrested when they were being exploited. The organization that I'm involved with, Swap Sacramento, we go to court with people all the time. And I would say it's about 50-50. None of them are going to say that they're being exploited. Some of them aren't being. They're consensual sex workers. It doesn't matter. They all end up with the same charges on their record. They all end up not being able to translate that into jobs in other areas if they want to go into work in other areas. So it's really important we break up this money flow that goes to the police departments. It would be better if that could go to housing and services, as so many other people have said. So if you're wondering, well, why did they do this if they're really not, saving the trafficking victims? It's because so much of human nature is about protecting yourself, and they're trying to protect their jobs, their livelihood, and their income flow, even if it isn't the right thing.
Thank you so much for that, Kristen. Let's see. We're getting
Can I add one thing in, Maxine?
Please do.
Which is, I guess, the NFL. I want to know the NFL does have a role here. Like the NFL, like all of this is happening because the NFL wants Los Angeles to look a certain way when it comes to town, and has made demands that it look a certain way, and has the economic power of all the money that's not just being spent this weekend, but this entire week is a week of very expensive parties and events and concerts that's part of this thing called the Super Bowl experience, all of which, during which the NFL wants poor and unhoused people in general, and some of who are sex workers, to disappear, while at the same time, I think very much engaging with sex workers throughout this kind of festival that's going on through this week. So I do think they are engaged with this, and they are the player here that's calling the shots. And so that money that they're spending, they could also be reinvested. Instead of like creating a pretend Los Angeles for a few days, our politicians, our government people could be working to make a real Los Angeles for everyone during all the time, during all times, not just when. It's funny, I was looking behind me to make sure my house is clean. I grew up in a house where we cleaned when company was coming. So this isn't just about when company comes, right? Like, let's actually invest in the city and make it a city where we're not trying to, what I usually do is throw everything in the closet or throw, sweep things under the rug when somebody comes over. And let's like make those investments real. And I do think the NFL has, obviously a ton of economic power. And is an important target of this advocacy work.
Yes, they do. And if it hadn't been for COVID, we would have had this in person. we would be down there now and having our rally. But there are local LA folks. I've seen them on Twitter, who are fighting back against these bad police practices. And definitely go lend your voices to help them. Let's see, I'm looking for some more questions. I know that probably Jerry and Antonia, had some more things they probably wanted to chime in on and contribute. Antonia?
Hey, yeah, sorry, I can't figure out how to change the color of my hand. It's driving me crazy. Anyway, sorry about that. So there is a question in the chat that is asking how other sex work orgs can get involved. And so I just wanted to speak up about like what we can do and what we are doing at Strippers United. We have a lot of campaigns. One of our big ones is a safety campaign about how to stay safe in a strip club when clients, customers, management assault people on the shop floor. So we do a lot of that. And what you can do is amplify, share, and promote and donate to sex worker campaigns, and go on our Instagrams and websites and just amplify and show up if there is something in person, if you can. And also, one thing that I noticed this past year during the pandemic, which I'm sure turned our lives kind of upside down in a lot of ways. Find forward-facing people who have the luxury and privilege to be forward-facing and get them to do the work if you can't. And use their privilege for good, and push them, push us, push me. And I will say that also, I reached out to the letter writers who wrote letters on my behalf to when I had my court case and took diversion, and I want to offer my services to write a letter on behalf of anyone you know who needs one, and also Melissa Chadburn, who is a labor organizer, ex-sex worker, and my best friend who grew up in foster care and is also a PhD candidate right now, will also write letters. She contacted me today and said she couldn't come, but to offer her services to write letters. And what that means is that you write to the judge and get people with fancy letterheads, and we write and talk about, we just rave about the person and say that this is not going to help, that they contribute to the community in these ways, and try to get that expunged. So I wanted to offer direct services in that capacity. So I'm going to put my email in the chat, and also we have a new website at strippersunited.org. You can donate, you can volunteer. We're exhausted and broke, like everyone here. And you can donate, volunteer, or just amplify. We have a lot of artists. Sex workers are the most amazing group of geniuses to organize that I've ever encountered. And everyone offers so much, but we can only do so much. Our capacity can be limited. And so just amplify us and stay involved and show up as you can. And so I just wanted to say that, and I'll put my email and I'll put Strippers United here. Maxine, do you want me to put the letter to Alex Padilla in the chat?
Sure,
again?
definitely. Definitely
Back
put it,
now?
yeah,
Okay.
put it in the chat. Put your Instagram in the
Okay.
chat. It's a good
Thank
time
you.
right now for everybody to put your social media in the chat so everybody can see it. You know, one of the things that we try to do at the erotic service providers is when we're contacted or when we see people who've been arrested for prostitution, is we reach out to them and we offer them the motion to dismiss. If you want to plead not guilty to your case, and you know, you want to tell the judge, hey, I should not be charged with prostitution, it's an unconstitutional law. And you know, the motion to dismiss and going through the, you know, hideous process of being in a trial is one of the ways to invalidate those anti-prostitution laws. So, you know, we deal with a lot of people, especially all the people who've been arrested recently across the United States. There were many prostitution operations, anti-prostitution sting operations. There were raids carried out in many states. And so, you know, there's a lot of people to have to talk to and help people emotionally and mentally through that really horrible, torturous, grueling process of being criminalized and arrested. Jerry, did you want to say any last couple words here? And I don't know if you have time to say anything about the New Zealand model.
As we're all talking, I'm thinking about our listeners and who they are and what their experience is. And some of you out there may be wondering, you know, is what you're hearing here, well, political thoughts? And this is what people who are politically involved say. And is it confined to those people? And the answer to that question is no. You will be very surprised if you look at mainstream scholarship, academics who have no political interest in any activist organizations, and they are frustrated that their voices are not heard by, for example, I just read this yesterday, the Sacramento cop who says, you know, I bust these clients and I sit down and I talk to them about how what they're doing enhances trafficking. And that's just not true. How often can you say that's just not true? You look at examples where sex work has been decriminalized. For example, as Maxine mentioned, New Zealand is a prime example. You look at government reports. You look at outside scholarship. You look at studies that are rigorous, statistical, They're boring as hell to read because they're rigorous number crunchers. These people are not political activists, and they will tell you, no, decriminalization does not enhance trafficking. It does not make people unsafe. It makes them better off. It makes them more secure. You go to Australia. Some states in Australia have liberalized their laws. New South Wales decriminalized. Government reports of Australia, outside scholarship within Australia and outside of Australia says, no, decriminalization does not increase trafficking. It does not make people unsafe. It makes sex workers safe. It makes them safe. And I'm talking about sources, once again, sources who are not politically oriented. These are scholars who make a living by enhancing their reputation at being rigorous scholars and researchers and statisticians. And these people keep trying to get the political environment of legislators and courts to listen to them. There are other myths, for example, sex work and disease. Oh, gee whiz, we got to stop sex work because it's all spreading disease, especially HIV. And you can notice Kristen's talk about brothels in Nevada. You can just see the paranoia there. We got to build a wall around them so those germs don't get out. Look at the mainstream scholarship, people who know what they are talking about. Read medical journals. These are mainstream medical journals. And they say, you know, I'm sorry if this shocks you, but when you criminalize sex work, that makes the health problems worse, not better. Worse, not better. That's what those people say who go out there and do research, and they are medical researchers. They are public health researchers, and that's what they are saying. And another excuse for the sting operation that wants to arrest everybody because it's Super Bowl time. Well, there's violence associated with sex work, so if we throw sex workers in jail, there will be no violence. Well, of course, sex workers face violence, and they face violence because the cops are not there to protect them. But overall, once again, if you look at mainstream scholarship, these scholars who do research on violence, on safety, they will tell you criminalization makes those problems worse, not better. Criminalization is at fault here. Why won't somebody listen? So anyway, I'm addressing my remarks in case some of you folks are skeptical, or you know your friends out there who are a little skeptical, roll their eyes and say, yeah, I know those people in that webinar, you know, they're having an invested interest. Tell them to get online, do a little research, you know, research this scholarship. It's not that hard to do. You don't have to go into the catacombs of some library and get out parchment and read language day in and day. Just go on your internet. It's okay. Look it up. No one will know you're researching sex work. You will find out a lot. You will find out a lot from people who are middle class, who grew up in culturally conservative environments, who decided to do research and become academics. You'll learn a lot from them. You'll learn a lot from them.
Thank you, Jerry. We are going to have a survey for all the listeners today to give us some feedback on our webinar. And we're going to wrap up now and have our last comments from all of our illustrious speakers. Kristen and Pearl, did you guys want to give some final comments?
We just, well, I just want to urge people to get involved, really get involved. get involved with the organizations, donate money, write the senators, write the governor about SB 357, the Loitering with Intent Act. Just get involved. Please get involved. We need everybody to make this work.
Ditto for me.
Thank you, Pearl. Thank you, Kristen. Soma, did you have some final comments?
Sure. I just have to say how awesome everyone is. First of all, what an honor to sit here with all of you. I just want to invite folks, I put it in the chat, but again, I want to invite folks to come out to protest. It's on our Instagram, and then you can create some signs and come yell with us. I think that's really good. And film police. And thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. How about you, Brad?
Yeah, it was great to be able to join this discussion, and I can't say enough about everyone kind of getting out there and supporting the repeal of this loitering with intent law. That means standing around thinking about something. That is not a crime. It is a coercive tool that impacts people, and also, even people who are not charged or get charged with other things that we know prosecutors use to harass and threaten people. And so it's definitely time for that law to go.
Thank you so much. And we have one more question in the chat. It says, how are Black, Indigenous, people of color, sex workers actively centered in the movement? Anybody want to answer that question? Alex?
Yeah, so there are lots of Black-led sex worker organizations doing their own organizing that's all connected to this. And you can find out more information about those organizations on Instagram. Us Pros is a multiracial organization. I'm a person of color. I come from Filipino heritage, and there are many of other people doing this work as well. And yeah, Chella was on this webinar tonight too. Chella is also on the board of SWAP LA. And so there are lots of organizations that are led by people of color and uplifting the most impacted folks who are people of color being targeted by these laws. And yes, Antonio mentions the Black Sex Worker Collective that is organizing in multiple places. So I believe that they also have an international connection as well. Us Pros is a part of an international collective of sex workers, and we are connected to sex workers in the UK, in Thailand, and beyond as well. As I mentioned, Empower is our sister organization in Thailand, working with women in the streets and also connecting their struggles of poverty to all workers, including farm workers.
Awesome. And there is a BIPOC collective of sex workers that I think they focus mostly on adult film performing. Yeah, so I think, they're all over the place. And I think that many of, art organizations have people of color. They're just not wanting to put their face in the media. They're doing a lot of the behind the scenes, daily work that it takes to make a bunch of our sex worker organizations function on no money. So yeah, I think we're everywhere.
I'll just throw out Black and Pink, which is like LGBTQ people of color working to abolish prisons as well as against decriminalization of sex work. I mentioned there's a national movement going around repealing these laws that criminalize people with HIV from engaging in sex work. And if you want a point of entry for that, there's the Southern HIV Decriminalization Network is great. And all of these led by people of color and people who are or formerly were sex workers.
Awesome, thank you. And so we're getting ready to end our webinar. I want to thank all of our speakers today that joined us for spent their time to help organize and get the word out, and to be able to, participate in getting some of the messaging out that, we're here and we're fighting back against these bad raids, and we want them to stop. We want the media to stop with their false and misleading narrative. And everybody can play a role in, helping put a stop to that. So if there are no other final, if anybody else wants to make a final c'est la vie, then we can go ahead and end our webinar today. And we will hopefully see you next time. You can follow us on the Sex Worker Nation YouTube channel and find all of our orgs on the stoptheraid.org. And hopefully we'll see our message really start to get out there as we get on with this large sporting event in the great city of Los Angeles. So thank you all for joining me today, and we will see you next time. Appreciate you.
Also, thank you, Claire, for handling it technologically. Really appreciate you. And thank you, translators.
Yes, thank you, beloved translators.
Thank you, Maxine. It was awesome.
Bye. Bye, Claire. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, goodbye.
Okay, bye.
I'm just saving the chat. Thank you for all your help.
Okay, a pleasure. Okay, have a good night.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.